The stars were dying. Admiral Zexhai pressed his four-fingered hand against the cold metal of the observation deck as he watched another coalition fleet disappear into nothing. The Void Swarm had consumed them in less than 10 minutes. Ships that had taken decades to build, crews that had trained for years, all gone in a flash of dark energy and twisted metal. The bridge behind him buzzed with desperate voices. His officers spoke in hushed tones about retreat routes and evacuation plans. But Zexhai knew the truth that none of them wanted to say out loud. There was nowhere left to run. "Admiral," his communications officer called out. Her voice shook despite her training. "The Nexus defense line has fallen. The swarm is moving toward the core worlds." Zexhai closed his eyes. The Nexus line had been their strongest defensive position, 300 ships armed with the most advanced weapons the galaxy could produce. Now they were just debris floating in space. "How long until they reach Alteria Prime?" he asked. 6 days, sir. Maybe 7 if we're lucky. 6 days. His homeworld had 12 billion people. Most of them had never even seen a weapon, let alone used one. They were scientists, artists, teachers, good people who had lived their entire lives in peace. The Void Swarm didn't care about any of that. Zexhai had been fighting these creatures for 3 years now. He had seen them strip entire planets down to bare rock. They ate everything. Metal, organic matter, energy itself. Nothing satisfied them. They just kept coming, wave after wave, consuming everything in their path. The worst part was how they adapted. Every weapon the Coalition used against them only worked once. The swarm would analyze it, understand it, and then become immune to it. Plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, reality bombs, nothing worked for long. "Sir," another officer spoke up, "we're receiving an emergency transmission from the High Council. They want all fleet commanders to report to Central Command immediately." Zexhai nodded. He had been expecting this call. The Council was probably going to order a full retreat to the Outer Rim. It was the smart thing to do. Save what they could and hope the swarm would eventually stop expanding. But deep down he knew it wouldn't work. The swarm had already consumed half the galaxy. They wouldn't stop until they had eaten everything. The journey to Central Command took 2 hours through hyperspace. When Zexhai arrived, he found the massive station buzzing with activity. Ships from every member species of the Coalition filled the docking bays. Humans, Alterians, Zephyrite, Christek, all the great races of the galaxy had sent their best. The council chamber was packed. Zexhai found a seat near the back and listened as the reports came in. Every single one was bad news. The 7th Fleet had been destroyed. The industrial worlds of Kepler sector were under attack. The evacuation of Proxima Colony had failed. High Counselor Vexhan stood at the center of the chamber. His ancient features looked even more tired than usual. "We have called this emergency session to discuss our remaining options," he said. "Our fleets are broken. Our weapons are useless. We need new solutions." The chamber erupted in desperate voices. Someone suggested retreating to the Magellanic Clouds. Another proposed trying to negotiate with the swarm. A few even talked about surrender. Zexhai felt sick. These were supposed to be the greatest minds in the galaxy, and they were talking about giving up. "What about the weapon archives?" someone called out. "Surely there's something we haven't tried yet." Counselor Vexhan nodded to his aide, who activated a massive holographic display. Thousands of files appeared, each one representing a classified weapon or technology. "We have reviewed everything," Vexhan said. "Temporal disruptors, dimensional bombs, planet killers, consciousness viruses. We have tried them all. The swarm adapts to everything within hours." The chamber fell silent. Zexhai stared at the display, watching as file after file was marked with red X's. Tried and failed. Tried and failed. The pattern repeated over and over. Then something caught his eye. At the very bottom of the list, almost hidden among the rejected files, was an entry marked in bright red. Unlike the others, it didn't have an X mark. Instead, it had a single word, quarantined. "What about that one?" Zexhai pointed at the file. The aide looked confused. "Which file, Admiral?" "The quarantined one." At the bottom, the chamber went quiet. Even Counselor Vexhan looked uncomfortable. "That's not a weapon," Vexhan said slowly. "That's a species file." "A species file? What species?" The aide's hands shook as he pulled up the file. The hologram changed to show a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. Species designation 7743H. Planet designation Earth. Status extreme quarantine. Do not approach under any circumstances. Zexhai leaned forward. Why are they quarantined? Because they're dangerous, Vexhan said. More dangerous than anything we've ever encountered. The chamber buzzed with confused voices. Dangerous? What could be more dangerous than the Void Swarm? Tell us about them, Zexhai demanded. Vexhan looked like he would rather be anywhere else. The file is over 300 years old. A survey ship found their planet by accident. The creatures there, they call themselves humans. They were primitive. No space travel, no energy weapons, still using chemical propulsion. That doesn't sound dangerous. You didn't read the full report. Vexhan's voice was barely a whisper. These humans, they wage war against their own species. Constantly. For thousands of years they have been killing each other with increasing efficiency. When our survey team observed them, they had weapons that could destroy their entire planet. Multiple times over. The chamber was silent now. Everyone was listening. They were studying their own destruction like it was a science project, Vexhan continued. Building better ways to kill, better ways to survive, better ways to adapt. The survey team's conclusion was that if humans ever developed space travel, they would become the greatest threat the galaxy had ever seen. Zexhai felt a chill run down his spine. So you quarantined them? We had to. The risk was too great. But that was 300 years ago, someone pointed out. They might be extinct by now. The aide pulled up more recent data. Long-range sensors show they're still there. Population has actually increased and... He paused, looking confused. Their electromagnetic output has grown exponentially in the last century. What does that mean? They're still developing fast, Zexhai stood up. The idea forming in his mind was crazy. Suicidal even. But they were already facing extinction. What did they have to lose? We contact them, he said. The chamber erupted in shocked voices. Several counselors started speaking at once, all of them saying the same thing. Absolutely not. Are you insane? Vexhan shouted over the noise. We quarantined them for a reason. Yes, Zexhai said calmly. Because they're dangerous. Exactly what we need right now. They could be worse than the swarm. Impossible. The swarm wants to consume everything. At least humans only kill other humans. The argument went on for hours. But in the end, desperation won. The vote was close, barely passing by 3 votes. But it passed. The galaxy's last hope was a species they had been too afraid to contact for 3 centuries. As the council session ended, Zexhai found himself wondering if they had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history, or if they had just found their salvation. Time would tell. The stars were still dying. But maybe, just maybe, they had found someone who could save them. Someone who understood war better than anyone else in the galaxy. Someone human. Ambassador Kithara had volunteered for what everyone called a suicide mission. The small stealth ship moved through space like a ghost. Its hull was covered in special metal that bent light around it, making it nearly invisible. But nearly invisible wasn't the same as completely invisible. If the Void Swarm spotted her, she would be dead in seconds. She had been traveling for 2 days now, moving carefully through space that used to belong to the Coalition. Now it belonged to the Swarm. Dark shapes moved between the stars like hungry shadows. Some were as small as fighters, others were bigger than space stations. Kithara tried not to think about the crews that had died fighting those things. Her ship's computer beeped softly. Approaching Sol system, it announced in her native language. Primitive electromagnetic radiation detected. Primitive. That's what the files had called the humans. But as her ship got closer to their star system, Kithara began to see things that didn't match the old reports. The outer planets had structures around them. Lots of structures. Mining stations, orbital platforms, defensive satellites. Some of them looked crude compared to Coalition technology. But there were so many of them. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. Computer. Scan for active military installations, she ordered. The response made her pause, unable to comply. Scanning interference detected. Recommend manual observation. Scanning interference? The old file said humans were barely using radio waves. How could they block advanced Coalition sensors? As her ship moved deeper into the system, things got stranger. The asteroid belt between the 4th and 5th planets was full of activity. Huge mining ships moved between the rocks, pulling out metals and rare elements. But these weren't the small operations she expected from a primitive species. These were industrial complexes bigger than most Coalition cities. Then she saw Earth itself. The planet was nothing like the images in the 300-year-old files. The night side glowed with billions of lights. Orbital stations surrounded it like a metal ring. Ships moved constantly between the planet and its moon, which also blazed with artificial light. But what really caught her attention were the ships in high orbit. Dozens of them. Each one was easily the size of a coalition destroyer, but their design was completely alien. Sharp angles, dark metal, weapon ports that looked like hungry mouths. These were not the chemical rockets the files had mentioned. Computer, attempt to establish communication with planetary authorities, she ordered. Warning. Multiple targeting systems have locked onto this vessel. Recommend immediate evasive action. Cathara's blood ran cold. They had detected her stealth ship. That should have been impossible with primitive technology. Before she could react, a voice came through her ship's speakers. It spoke in perfect coalition standard, the official language used by all member species. Unknown vessel, you are in restricted space. Identify yourself immediately or you will be destroyed. The voice was calm, professional, almost bored. Like being threatened with destruction was a normal part of their day. Cathara activated her communication system with shaking hands. This is Ambassador Cathara of the Galactic Coalition. I request an audience with your planetary leadership. The galaxy is in danger. There was a long pause. Then a different voice came through the speakers. This one was older, more authoritative. Ambassador, this is Fleet Admiral Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. We've been expecting you. Expecting me? We've been monitoring coalition communications for quite some time. We know about the Void Swarm. We know about your losses. And we know why you're here. Cathara felt dizzy. They knew about the coalition? They had been watching the war? How long have you been monitoring us? Long enough. Admiral Chen's voice carried a hint of amusement. Your quarantine protocols are very good, Ambassador. But they only work if the quarantined species doesn't know they're being quarantined. The implications hit her like a physical blow. You've known about us for 300 years? Actually, we've known about you for quite a bit longer than that. Your survey ship wasn't as stealthy as you thought. We captured it. Captured it? The survey ship had reported a successful mission and returned to Coalition space. How could the humans have captured it? We let it go after we learned everything we needed to know, Chen explained. Your language, your technology, your political structure. We've been preparing ever since. Preparing for what? For this conversation. Cathara's head spun. Everything she thought she knew about this mission was wrong. The humans weren't primitive. They weren't isolated. They had been watching the galaxy for centuries, learning, planning. I need to speak with someone in charge, she said weakly. You are speaking with someone in charge. I command all Earth military forces. What do you need, Ambassador? The question was so direct, so matter-of-fact, that it took her a moment to respond. We need help. The Void Swarm is going to destroy everything. Our weapons don't work. Our fleets are broken. We don't know how to stop them. We do. Those two simple words carried more weight than any speech she had ever heard. You know how to fight the swarm? Ambassador, we've been fighting creatures like the swarm for our entire history. We call them different things. Viruses, cancers, invasive species. But the principle is the same. They consume resources, they adapt to resistance, and they spread until they're stopped. But the swarm is different. They're intelligent. They learn from every battle. So do we. Admiral Chen's voice was cold now, like winter wind. The difference is we've been practicing warfare against our own species for 10,000 years. We've gotten very good at it. Cathara found herself shaking. The casual way he talked about warfare, like it was a normal part of life, reminded her why humans had been quarantined in the first place. Will you help us? She asked. We already are. Every human military installation is preparing for deployment. Our fleets will launch within the hour. How many ships do you have? Enough. There was something in Admiral Chen's voice that made her glad she couldn't see his face. But Ambassador, you need to understand something. Once we get involved, there's no going back. We don't fight defensive wars. We don't fight to survive. We fight to win. What does that mean? It means when this is over, the Void Swarm won't exist anymore. None of them. We'll hunt down every last one and destroy it completely. The certainty in his voice was terrifying. Not because she doubted he could do it, but because she believed he could. There's something else you need to know, Chen continued. We won't be returning to our quarantine after this is finished. Humanity is joining the galactic community, whether the coalition wants us to or not. Cathara opened her mouth to object, then closed it again. What could she say? The coalition was dying. They were in no position to make demands. Your ship will be escorted to Luna Station, Chen said. You can observe our fleet departure from there. Try not to be alarmed by what you see. What am I going to see? The reason your ancestors were smart to quarantine us. The communication ended. A few moments later, 2 human ships appeared next to her vessel. They were sleek, predatory-looking things with weapon systems she didn't recognize. As they escorted her toward the human moon, Cathara wondered if the coalition had just made a deal with their saviors or their new masters. Through her ship's windows, she could see more human vessels emerging from hidden bases throughout the system. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Each one looked like it had been designed for one purpose: killing things as efficiently as possible. For the first time since the Void Swarm had appeared, Cathara felt something other than despair. She felt fear. But this time, she wasn't afraid of losing the war. She was afraid of what would happen when humanity won it. Luna Station was like nothing Cathara had ever seen. The human moon base stretched across the entire surface, a massive complex of metal and glass that pulsed with activity. Ships launched from hidden bays every few minutes. Workers in strange armor moved equipment that hummed with unknown energy. Everything was efficient, purposeful, deadly. Admiral Chen met her at the docking bay. He was shorter than most coalition species, but there was something about him that made the space around him feel smaller. His eyes were dark and sharp, like he could see through steel. "Welcome to Luna Station, Ambassador," he said. "I hope you're ready for what comes next." He led her through corridors filled with humans preparing for war. They moved with practiced precision, checking weapons, loading supplies, studying tactical displays. What struck her most was how quiet they were. No shouting, no panic, no dramatic speeches. Just calm, methodical preparation for battle. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. 300 years, Chen replied without hesitation. "Ever since we realized we weren't alone in the galaxy." They entered a massive command center filled with screens showing star maps, fleet positions, and tactical data. Hundreds of humans worked at stations, coordinating what looked like the largest military operation in galactic history. "This is our Deep Space Command," Chen explained. "From here, we coordinate all human military operations beyond the Sol system." "Beyond the Sol system?" Cathara stared at him. "You have operations outside your home system?" "Ambassador, did you really think we stayed home for 300 years? We've had ships throughout Coalition space for decades, watching, learning, preparing." A young human officer approached and handed Chen a data pad. He glanced at it and nodded. "Excellent. The Prometheus fleet is ready for deployment." "Prometheus fleet?" Cathara asked. Chen gestured to one of the large screens. It showed dozens of ships unlike anything in the Coalition archives. They were massive angular vessels that looked more like weapons than spacecraft. Their hulls were dark metal that seemed to absorb light. "Project Prometheus has been our primary focus for the last century," Chen explained. "We studied every piece of technology we could find. Coalition ships, swarm biomatter, even some artifacts from extinct civilizations. Then we made it better. Better how? "Show her the weapon specs," Chen ordered. The screen changed to display technical readouts that made Cathara's head spin. Antimatter cannons that could punch through any known armor. Reality disruptors that could fold space around targets. Something called quantum plague bombs that she didn't even want to understand. "These weapons, they're beyond anything the Coalition has ever developed," she whispered. "That's because you develop weapons to defend yourselves," Chen said. "We develop weapons to end wars." Another officer approached. "Admiral, the first swarm contact is occurring at Nexus Prime. Coalition forces are requesting immediate assistance." "Deploy Battle Group 7, Chen ordered. "Full engagement protocols." "Sir, what about the Coalition fleet?" "They'll be in the combat zone." Chen was quiet for a moment. "Signal the Coalition ships to withdraw to minimum safe distance. We don't want them getting hurt." Getting hurt. He talked about the Coalition's most powerful warships like they were children who might get stepped on. "Admiral," Cathara said, "I should explain the tactical situation. The swarm has adaptive defenses. Whatever weapons you use, they'll become immune to them within hours." Chen smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Ambassador, let me explain something about human warfare. We've been fighting adaptive enemies for thousands of years. Diseases that mutate, Insects that develop resistance, competitors who learn from our tactics. We know how to deal with adaptation. How? We don't use the same weapon twice. We don't follow the same strategy twice. We make sure that by the time they adapt to what we're doing, we're already doing something completely different. The main screen changed to show the battle at Nexus Prime. Coalition ships were retreating as swarm biovessels closed in. Then the human fleet arrived. What happened next defied everything Cathara thought she knew about space combat. The human ships didn't form battle lines or engage in traditional fleet maneuvers. Instead, they scattered in all directions, each ship following its own attack pattern. Some launched clouds of small objects that moved too fast to track. Others fired beams of energy that seemed to bend space itself. But the most terrifying thing was what came out of the human ships. Are those boarding pods? Cathara asked. We prefer to call them insertion vehicles, Chen replied. The swarm thinks in terms of ship-to-ship combat. They're not prepared for close-quarters battle. On the screen, she watched human soldiers in powered armor smash through swarm biohulls and begin fighting hand-to-hand with creatures the size of small buildings. The humans were winning. This is impossible, she breathed. The swarm biosoldiers are nearly indestructible. Coalition forces have never been able to engage them in close combat. That's because coalition forces try to fight them fairly, Chen said. We don't fight fair. We fight to win. The battle was over in less than an hour. The entire swarm fleet had been destroyed or captured. Not a single human ship had been lost. How? Cathara asked. How did you do that? Experience, Chen replied. We've been fighting wars since before we discovered fire. We've fought with sticks and stones, swords and spears, guns and bombs, and now energy weapons and antimatter. But the principle is always the same, which is, find the enemy's weakness and exploit it until they're dead. Another officer approached with another report. Admiral, we're receiving surrender requests from swarm forces in 12 systems. Surrender requests? Cathara was stunned. The swarm doesn't surrender. They don't even have a concept of surrender. They do now, Chen said grimly. Apparently watching their entire fleet get destroyed in an hour gave them some new concepts to think about. What are your orders, sir? The officer asked. Chen was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was cold as space. No prisoners. No survivors. Hunt them down and destroy every last one. We finish this war properly. Cathara felt sick. Admiral, surely some of them could be useful for study. We could learn from them, maybe even reform them. Chen turned to look at her. His eyes were like black holes. Ambassador, let me tell you something about the human approach to warfare. When we identify an existential threat to our species, we don't capture it. We don't study it. We don't try to reform it. We eliminate it completely, permanently, so it can never threaten us again. But the Coalition has laws about extinction. We don't destroy entire species. The Coalition also doesn't win wars against existential threats, Chen pointed out. We do. That's why you called us. The screens around the command center lit up with reports from across the galaxy. Human fleets were engaging swarm forces in dozens of systems. Every battle followed the same pattern. Total human victory. Total swarm destruction. How long until it's over? Cathara asked. At current pace? 6 months. Maybe less if we can locate their breeding worlds. 6 months. The war that had been raging for 3 years, consuming half the galaxy, would be over in 6 months. What happens after? She asked. Chen smiled again, and this time it was even less pleasant than before. After Ambassador, we discussed the new political structure of the galaxy, because things are going to be very different from now. Cathara realized that the Coalition had indeed been saved, but the galaxy that emerged from this war would belong to humanity, and she wasn't sure if that was better or worse than extinction. On the screens around her, human fleets continued their methodical destruction of the swarm. Each victory was total, decisive, permanent. The humans weren't just winning the war, they were ending it forever. Admiral HFY had seen many battles in his long military career, but nothing had prepared him for what he witnessed at Nexus Prime. His remaining ships hung in space like broken toys, their hulls scarred and their weapons depleted. Around him, the wreckage of the Coalition's final defense line drifted in the darkness. 300 of the galaxy's finest warships reduced to scrap metal and cooling plasma. The Void Swarm had been minutes away from breaking through to the core worlds when the humans arrived. HFY watched the tactical display with growing amazement as the human fleet emerged from hyperspace. 67 ships against a swarm armada of over 2,000. By all military logic, it should have been a massacre. It was a massacre, just not the one anyone expected. "Sir," his tactical officer called out, her voice shaking. "The human vessels are not following standard combat protocols." That was an understatement. Instead of forming battle lines or establishing defensive positions, the human ships scattered in all directions. Some dove straight into the heart of the swarm formation. Others circled around the edges like hunting predators. A few simply stopped and began launching objects that Zexhi's sensors couldn't identify. "What are they doing?" he muttered. His question was answered when the first human weapons fired. The lead swarm bioship, a massive creature the size of a small moon, simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, the next there was only empty space and an expanding cloud of particles. "Impossible," breathed his weapons officer. "Nothing can destroy a swarm dreadnought that quickly." But the humans were just getting started. More weapons fired, each one different from the last. Beams of twisted light that turned swarm hulls into crystal. Missiles that phased through armor and exploded inside their targets. Energy fields that seemed to eat matter itself. The swarm tried to adapt, their bioships shifting and changing to counter each new weapon. But every time they adapted to one threat, the humans switched to something completely different. They're not giving them time to evolve, Zexhi realized. Every weapon is a new type of attack. Then he saw something that made his blood run cold. Small craft were launching from the human ships, not fighters or bombers, but what looked like boarding pods. They were heading straight for the swarm biovessels. "Are they insane?" his tactical officer gasped. "No one boards a swarm ship. The biosoldiers inside will tear them apart." Zexhi had seen swarm biosoldiers before. Creatures the size of shuttlecraft with armor like living metal and weapons that could melt through hull plating. Even coalition power armor was useless against them. The human boarding pods smashed through swarm hulls like they were made of paper. What emerged from them defied belief. Human soldiers in armor that moved like living creatures. They didn't walk. They flowed across surfaces, moving in ways that shouldn't have been possible. When swarm biosoldiers attacked them, the humans didn't retreat or try to find cover. They attacked back. Zexhi watched in horrified fascination as a single human soldier faced down a creature 10 times his size. The swarm biosoldier fired a plasma burst that would have vaporized a coalition marine. The human's armor absorbed it and fired back with weapons that tore through the creature's natural defenses like they weren't there. "Enhance the feed on boarding pod 7, he ordered. The main screen zoomed in on one of the human soldiers. Through his armor's transparent faceplate, Zexhi could see the human's face. He was young, maybe barely out of training, but his eyes were cold and focused as he methodically destroyed creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 years. "How are they doing this?" his communications officer whispered. "Experience," came a voice from behind them. Zexhi turned to see Ambassador Kithera had arrived on his bridge. She looked pale and shaken. "Ambassador? What are you doing here?" "Admiral Chen thought you might want to observe the human combat doctrine firsthand," she replied. "He's allowing coalition officers to monitor their operations." "Combat doctrine? This isn't doctrine, this is madness." "No," Kithera said quietly. "This is how humans fight wars. They told me they've been practicing for 10,000 years. On the screen, more human soldiers were overwhelming swarm positions with tactics that made no sense. They used their fallen enemies as weapons, turned captured swarm technology against its creators, and adapted to alien environments in real time. They're treating this like a training exercise, Zexhi realized. Because for them it is. Admiral Chen showed me their military archives. Humans have been fighting wars like this since before they discovered space travel. Against their own species, against hostile environments, against diseases and predators and anything else that threatened them. A new alarm sounded on the bridge. "Sir, the swarm forces are beginning to retreat." Zexhi stared at his tactical officer. "Retreat? The swarm doesn't retreat." "They are now, sir. All swarm vessels are withdrawing from the combat zone." For the first time in recorded history, the Void Swarm was running away from a battle. But the humans weren't letting them go. Zexhi watched as the human fleet pursued the fleeing swarm ships with relentless efficiency. Every biovessel that tried to escape was hunted down and destroyed. The humans moved through space like they owned it, coordinating their attacks with a precision that spoke of centuries of practice. "They're not just fighting a battle," he said in wonder. "They're conducting an extermination." That's exactly what they're doing, Cathara confirmed. Admiral Chen was very clear about their objectives. Total elimination of the swarm threat. But some of those bioships might contain valuable intelligence. Prisoners could tell us about swarm breeding colonies, command structures. I suggested the same thing. Admiral Chen's response was that dead enemies don't require intelligence analysis. The battle was over in 3 hours. The entire swarm force had been destroyed. Not a single human ship had been lost. A few had taken damage, but they were already conducting field repairs with equipment that seemed to fix itself. Incredible, Zexai breathed. How many casualties did they take? Cathara checked her communication device. 17 wounded. No deaths. 17 wounded against a force of 2,000 swarm vessels. Humans don't fight to survive, Admiral. They fight to win. There's a difference. Zexai's communication system activated. Admiral Chen's voice filled the bridge. Admiral Zexai, this is Admiral Chen. I trust you found our combat demonstration educational. Admiral Chen, your tactics are unprecedented. How did you develop such effective strategies? Practice, Admiral. Lots and lots of practice. We've been preparing for this war longer than your species has had space travel. What are your next objectives? We're going to hunt down every remaining swarm force in the galaxy, systematically, thoroughly, until none of them remain. All of them? Admiral, that could take years. At current pace, we estimate 6 months. We have fleets deploying to every known swarm system. By the time we're finished, the word swarm will only exist in history books. Zexai felt a chill. The casual way Chen discussed the complete elimination of a species that had terrorized the galaxy was deeply unsettling. Admiral, what happens after the swarm is destroyed? There was a pause. When Chen spoke again, his voice carried a different tone, harder, more final. After Admiral Zexai, we discussed the new reality of galactic civilization, because the galaxy that emerges from this war will be very different from the one that existed before it. The communication ended. Around Zexai's bridge, his officers looked at each other with expressions of relief mixed with fear. They had been saved. But by whom? And at what cost? On the main screen, human ships were already jumping to hyperspace, heading for their next target. Somewhere in the galaxy, another swarm force was about to learn what it meant to face an enemy that had been practicing war for 10,000 years. Zexai wondered if the galaxy had traded one existential threat for another. But at least this threat was on their side, for now. 6 months later, Ambassador Cathara stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station, watching human children play with young aliens in the station's central park. The war was over. The Void Swarm had been completely eliminated from the galaxy. Every bioship destroyed, every breeding colony sterilized, every trace of their existence wiped clean. The humans had been as thorough as they had promised, but the galaxy that remained was nothing like the one she had known. Beautiful sight, isn't it? A voice said behind her. Cathara turned to see Admiral Chen approaching. He looked different now, less like a military commander and more like a politician, but his eyes still held that same sharp intelligence that had made her nervous during their first meeting. Admiral, I didn't expect to see you here. It's just Chen now, he corrected. I've retired from active military service. I'm part of the civilian transition team. Transition team? Chen gestured toward the viewing window. Outside, construction crews were working on another expansion to the station. Human workers in powered suits labored alongside coalition engineers, building something that belonged to neither culture and both. The integration process, Chen explained. We're establishing joint facilities throughout former swarm territory. Places where humans and coalition species can work together, live together, learn from each other. Cathara watched a human child show an Alterian youngster how to operate some kind of toy. The Alterian's parents watched nervously, but the children were laughing together. Your people work fast, she observed. We've had practice. Humans have been integrating different cultures for thousands of years, usually through conquest, admittedly, but we've learned better methods since then. Is that what this is? Conquest? Chen was quiet for a moment. No, Ambassador. This is evolution. They walked through the station's main corridor, past shops and restaurants and schools where dozens of species mingled freely. Human technology had been shared generously. Medical advances that extended lifespans, manufacturing techniques that eliminated scarcity, energy systems that made entire worlds self-sufficient. The Coalition Council is having trouble accepting the changes, Cathara said. I know. We expected that. 300 years of isolation followed by 6 months of total war is a lot to adjust to. Some of them are calling for new quarantine protocols. They want to limit human expansion. Chen stopped walking and looked at her directly. And what do you think of that idea, Ambassador? Cathara considered her words carefully. She had seen what humans could do when they felt threatened. I think it would be a mistake. Because you're afraid of us? Because I've seen what you can accomplish when you're motivated to help. It was true. Human colonies were sprouting throughout the galaxy, but they weren't the military outposts many had feared. They were research centers, manufacturing hubs, educational facilities, places where human knowledge and coalition, wisdom combined to create things neither could have achieved alone. The medical research station at Proxima has developed cures for 17 genetic diseases in the last 4 months, she continued. The engineering consortium at Wolf 359 has designed ships that are faster and more efficient than anything either of our civilizations had produced separately. And your people are sharing it all freely. No patents, no restrictions, no demands for payment or political concessions. Chen smiled. Did you expect us to charge rent for saving the galaxy? I expected you to behave like conquerors. Instead, you're behaving like... She paused, searching for the right word. Like neighbors? Like family. They entered the station's central plaza, where a memorial had been erected. It listed the names of every coalition world that had been lost to the swarm, every ship that had been destroyed, every life that had been taken. At the base of the memorial, flowers from dozens of worlds created a garden of remembrance. We could have been here sooner, Chen said quietly. If the quarantine hadn't existed, if we had been part of the galactic community from the beginning, maybe the swarm never would have gotten as far as they did. Or maybe humanity would have become the threat instead of the swarm. Maybe. We'll never know now. Cathara studied the memorial. Among the names of coalition heroes were newer additions. Humans who had died in the final battles, giving their lives to save worlds they had never seen for people they had never met. What happens now? She asked. Now we build something better. The coalition was designed to maintain peace between species that didn't trust each other. But we don't have that problem anymore. We don't? Chen gestured around the plaza where humans and aliens worked and played together without apparent concern for species differences. Look around, Ambassador. Your children are learning human languages. Our children are learning coalition history. In a generation, maybe 2. The idea of separate human and coalition civilizations will seem as outdated as the idea that planets can't be shared. It was a beautiful vision, but Cathara had learned to be cautious about human plans. And if some species prefer to remain separate, if they don't want to integrate, then they don't have to. Integration isn't conquest, Ambassador. It's invitation. A young human approached them carrying a tablet filled with reports. Chen glanced at it and nodded. Excuse me for a moment, he said, and walked a few steps away to take a communication call. Cathara watched him coordinate the construction of a new research facility, approve funding for an educational exchange program, and authorize the deployment of medical supplies to a planet she had never heard of. All in the space of 5 minutes. When he returned, she asked, Don't you ever rest? There's too much to do. We have 300 years of isolation to make up for, and a galaxy to rebuild. Is that what drives you? Guilt over the quarantine? Chen considered the question. Partly, but mostly it's opportunity. For the first time in human history, we have a chance to build something that isn't born from conflict. A civilization based on cooperation instead of competition. And you think it will work? I think it has to work. Because the alternative is another war, and next time we might not be the ones winning it. They walked to another viewing window, this one showing the construction of a massive shipyard. But unlike the warships that had defeated the swarm, these vessels were designed for exploration, research, and colonization. Where will you go? Cathara asked. Everywhere. The galaxy is bigger than any of us imagined, and we've barely explored a tiny fraction of it. There are new worlds to discover, new species to meet, new challenges to face. Together. Cathara thought about the Coalition Council's fears, their calls for new restrictions on human expansion. Then she thought about the children in the plaza, playing together without caring about species boundaries. I'll support the integration initiative, she said. I hoped you would. We'll need coalition voices to make this work. Just promise me something. What? If humanity ever faces another existential threat, another enemy like the swarm, you won't hesitate to ask for help. Don't go back to isolation, Chen looked surprised. Why would we do that? Because that's what species do when they're afraid. They pull back, they build walls, they try to handle everything alone. Ambassador, we spent 300 years alone. It was the most wasteful, boring, frustrating period in human history. We're never going back to that. Outside the window, the shipyard continued its work. Human and coalition engineers worked side by side, building vessels that would carry their combined civilizations to the stars. The galaxy was healing. The scars left by the swarm would fade with time, replaced by new colonies, new discoveries, new friendships between species that had once been too afraid to meet. It wasn't the galaxy Cathara had grown up in, but it was better, and for the first time since the war began, she felt truly optimistic about the future. The stars were no longer dying, they were being reborn, and humanity would be there to help them shine.